Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, non-binary, distinguished guests, welcome to Ridiculous, the Life of a Clown. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ridiculous, Life of a Clown. Today I'm speaking with Felicity Hesed. Felicity Hesed is the artistic director of the San Francisco Circus Center and an amazing clown who went to the Clown Conservatory and has been part of the clown and circus community in San Francisco for many years. And how are you today, Felicity?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, great.
So I know I kind of summed it up, but if you could tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure, yes. Well, I just started on as artistic director at Circus Center. Prior to that, like many artists, I had been sort of cobbling together the many facets of my profession and my interests. So performing as a clown and an aerialist, as well as directing circus and theater. And during the pandemic, I started doing more video production and producing in general. So, and then in addition to that, I also teach. So like many artists, a little bit of everything keeps it interesting and busy.
Very, very busy. But that's better than having nothing to do.
Absolutely.
What drove you to clown in the first place?
Oh, that's such a good question. I've done theater pretty much all my life. When I was a kid, my dad directed shows at a high school. So, I would always go with him to rehearsal and watch the high schoolers, doing their musicals, and it was always fun. And whenever he needed a little kid in the show, I got to be that kid, So I really had been acting and doing theater pretty much all my life. I majored in theater when I went to college, and then after college, I decided to pursue acting. So I moved to Chicago to try and be an actor, and I was doing the thing and auditioning for a million shows and sometimes getting into stuff, and I actually became a little disillusioned with the whole theater world because it wasn't like theater in an educational setting where you get to do these amazing shows by the greatest playwrights. Instead, it was people were doing stuff that would sell tickets, and sometimes it was good and sometimes it was not so interesting. So, I'm in my early 20s and kind of trying to figure out what to do with my life. And one day I was walking down the street and I looked into the windows of a building and there were people inside of there doing circus. They were tumbling and hanging from trapezes and juggling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to try that. That looks so fun. So I started taking circus classes and, became obsessed like most people who do circus become obsessed. Then I was like, oh, I could start combining circus and theater. And that really was thrilling to me, like a different sort of physical vocabulary for the stage. So I started creating acts and shows that really were a combination of circus and theater. And somewhere in there, I realized that clowning seemed like the obvious combo of those two things. So I was looking for more training, found the Clown Conservatory. So I kind of stumbled into it, honestly. And for a long time, I was really uncomfortable even with the term clown. I never really saw myself as that. I always felt like I wasn't very funny and felt kind of uncomfortable in that way. So I would call myself like a reluctant clown for a long time. Even when I did Clown Conservatory, it was really difficult for me. I felt really shy and uncomfortable a lot of the time. Yeah. I don't know. Did that sort of answer your question? So what drew me to clowning? I don't know. I kind of took, I a little bit felt like it was the obvious thing that I should probably try and do. And I also sort of didn't like that. And then kind of found my way sort of around the full circle till I was like, oh my gosh, I am a clown. That is the thing that makes the most sense. And I love doing it. And I think one of the best way into clowning for me was working with an audience, doing interactive and audience volunteer stuff. It's different than acting. I like acting where I get to be a character and I get to be this different person and I go into that fully. But then you can't do that totally when you're interacting with the audience. You have to bring so much of yourself, and you never know what's going to happen. So you have to be totally present in the moment. And I found I could do that. I could like bring a character to that moment and be with an audience and make this sort of real thing happen, and just like be with them in this really honest and open way. So I guess I would say, like, if there was one thing that like really helped me find my way to clowning, it would be that. But I believe I am still definitely a student of clowning. I don't know if I would ever like feel confident saying like I am a fully realized clown. That was a long answer. I hope it made sense.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much. On that same degree, just slight elaboration. When you're performing, what are you reaching for? What are you trying to accomplish?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm, I guess to give like a general answer to that, I would say connection with the audience. That is the ultimate. Then you can get more specific depending on, this, that, or the other thing. But I would say with pretty much all this stuff I perform, that is my ultimate goal, whether I'm on a trapeze doing something, or if I'm actually like out in the audience or have someone on stage, or even if I'm doing a role where, we have the fourth wall and I'm not speaking directly to the audience. To me, the goal is the reason we do that, and we do it with an audience there, is so that to really like bring the audience in, and to make that connection between humans that would never normally meet, and to do it in through storytelling and through metaphor.
What brought you to trapeze?
Well, when I started taking those classes in Chicago, it was the thing I fell in love with most immediately. I just, I don't know, it was fun. I like that it was really difficult, but it wasn't like exercising at a gym where you kind of exercise for no purpose. It was like this great physical hard activity, but it was beautiful, and it feels good and exciting, and you have like clear goals with it. It's like this next thing you want to be able to do, and then the next thing, and so it always stays sort of like new and fresh in that way. I don't know. And everybody, people for whatever reason are kind of drawn to different things, skills in the circus. And for me, that was the one. And I have to say, like, I did not pursue it because I thought it would work well for clowning. I actually fell in love with trapeze before I fell in love with clowning. But I was, I think quite unfortunately, told for a long time that I was like too old to do circus. When I started at the old age of 25, I was told I was too old to do circus. So I did it for fun because I loved it, but I never really took it like seriously. I didn't think like, oh, I could do something with this, because I kept being told I couldn't. And then I did clowning kind of separately. I have to say, Paoli Lacey was one of my, mentors and favorite coaches in ClownCon, and she had been a trapeze artist, and she had done some comedy clowning, or some comedy trapeze. I'd never seen it, but I'd heard about it. And it was about a year after one of my kids was born, and I was like getting back into my first child, I think I was getting back into shape and stuff, and really tragically, Paoli died. She'd been sick for a long time, but she died, and I was helping to put together a benefit, or a memorial for her, not a benefit, sorry, a memorial for her. And we were going to make it a show, because that's what Paoli would have loved. And at that moment, I was like, I need to finally put together a comedy trapeze act in honor of Paoli. And so I did. And then after that, it was like I just kind of kept doing it. It was like I had finally opened the floodgates and allowed myself to explore this thing, which ended up working out really great for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we miss Paoli a lot. You talked about being a director and a producer. What brought you into those roles?
Well, you could ask my family. I think they would tell you I've always been really bossy, and I kind of like being in charge, and I'm good at it. So that kind of works out for me, being a leader. And I've always enjoyed directing. I feel like directing and performing to me are very different ways to like sort of like get to the same thing to get to that sort of like ultimate goal of like making beautiful art and connecting with the audience. For me, I like directing because I like when I have a vision for a show and then I can work with people to make it happen. And then it always turns out differently than what I had first envisioned, but it's such a thrilling process to work with performers in that way. And producing, I think, is kind of like a natural extension. If you want to do your own work, then at some point you got to kind of learn to produce it. So that was sort of how I sort of was like, I better start learning some skills in producing so that I can get my stuff out there. It's hard to find other people who just want to produce your stuff for you. So did that answer?
For me, producing is much more of a support role than directing. Producing, you're supporting an entire ensemble, you're supporting an entire production, and directing, you are leading. In my life, I've always fallen to the role of having to be a leader, being just kind of thrust upon me, having to be the person in charge. And I kind of vastly prefer, at this point, producing, because it is more of a support role than having to be the one who is absolutely responsible for everything. Though in a way, as a producer, you're also absolutely responsible for everything, so it's a tough call.
I agree with you, though. And if you want to produce some of my stuff or you want me to direct some of your stuff, I'm happy to, because I prefer directing to producing.
At this point, I think I prefer producing just because it's so much my background. So the artistic director position, how did that come about?
Well, during the pandemic, I, like many people, I sort of like this fire kind of was lit in me and I was like, I must keep making stuff, like pandemic be damned, you're not going to hold me back. So I did. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was actually scheduled with Circus Center. I had been hired already to direct A Midsummer Night's Dream, a circus version with them. It was supposed to be that first summer of the pandemic. That was 2020, I think. And, we held auditions in the spring, and then a week after our auditions were held, everything shut down in San Francisco. So I was in this really awkward position where I had auditioned all of these performers, and I didn't want to just leave them hanging. So I went ahead and cast it, because at that point we all kind of hoped, give it 2-3 weeks, we'll be back to normal. So I cast the show, and then it was like, oh, this is lasting longer. So we started doing Zoom rehearsals, and then the Zoom rehearsals turned into this like support group almost, where it was like the thing we had to hold on to, was seeing each other every week and doing like working on choreography and reading the script. And it was like really an important part of our lives for many of us. It was like the only bright spot. And then when it became clear like things were not going to open, we couldn't do a show, we decided to switch and do a virtual show. So we, following all the rules, we found ways to video and created this sort of like wild, this wild version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, very early in the pandemic. So it's got some great stuff and some really funny, silly pandemic moments too. So I did that for Circus Center, and then later in the pandemic, as things were getting better, this past winter, I started working on a project called Circus Popups, where we did these pop-ups around town. It was a circus performer and a musician, and we popped up all over San Francisco. And I started just working on this project with a couple of friends. And Circus Center found out about it and said, hey, we have some grant money, we'd love to support this. And that was amazing, because we were just like scraping to make it work. So we were able to like do it right and pay performers, and that was awesome. And I think at that point, Barry Kendall, the executive director of Circus Center, thought like, Felicity has been the person who has been keeping, Circus Center in the artistic world. Because I just sort of like took the initiative to do both those projects. So he reached out and asked if I wanted to be the artistic director, kind of said, you're sort of doing the job already, let's make it official. So that was a really lovely thing to hear, and I'm so excited. I love working with Circus Center. I love the opportunity to work with the staff there and also the students. I love doing shows where I can combine professionals and students. So it's a thrilling opportunity to lead the artistic development of the school in a big way, and also get to put my own artistic stamp on it.
And I mean, this may be too early and it may be too big, but what is, in a nutshell, your vision for the Circus Center as an artist?
Yeah, that's a great question that I'm sort of working on figuring out. Well, I can give you a little sneak preview into sort of our goal for this year, or our vision for this year. We are coming out of the pandemic, like everyone, hopefully, right? Cross fingers. And we have a lot of changes happening at Circus Center. So we are leaning into this idea of legacy and innovation as our theme for this coming year. Really holding on to the things that make us special, the Chinese acrobatics, the long legacy of very disciplined training, and a lot of the programs that we've had for a long time, and then also trying to really push into the future. The world of circus is changing in a big way right now, I think, and I think the pandemic is kind of forced those doors open even wider. Now people are doing all this video stuff, and you see dance, and you see theater, and you see street, and it's really all over. And with the big circuses closing, there's some question as to what is to become of it. But I think circus is stronger than ever, despite it no longer having those kind of big domineering companies. So that's the other thing, is we're really looking to kind of push into the future and be a place where people can incubate new ideas and get new and different with circus and try stuff out, and maybe it'll flop or maybe it'll be amazing. But we hope that it can be a place where we can let some of that ferment and grow.
That's so great. That really flows with the kind of things that I'm trying to do myself. And I think a lot of people are taking circus into new forms and new formats. And but let's pull it back in a little bit to you personally. So as a clown and an aerialist, as a performer, when you go, what's your process for creating a new piece of work? How do you go about doing that?
That is a great question. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the same every time. I guess I would say there are the times where I have a vision for something or whatever, and sometimes that starts with a storyline or a character, or even just an image. And then that grows into something. For example, I had created a solo show, and I just started touring it before the pandemic started, and that sort of stopped that. But for that show, it sort of almost came to me like pieces of a dream sort of started to fit into place of this show. And then of course there were the big holes. But those kind of images of it in this, it was a storyline basically of a woman who has it's kind of my story, I guess, a little bit, but in this show, it's a woman who's a violinist. The whole thing starts with her coming on stage to play the violin, and she ends up falling in love with an audience member. This did not happen in my real life, but she falls in love, and they get married right there on stage, and then they start having babies, and it's the whole career is just out the window, and all there is this relationship and the babies sort of take over everything, and then the relationship ends, and she's sort of left with this a career gone and all these babies everywhere, and it's sort of then a journey kind of back to herself. So a lot of those things, some of the images came to me, and then there were pieces of it that were an old act that I wanted to bring in. A long time ago, before I even had kids, I had worked on an act with my husband, actually, where we got married and had babies and juggled these babies, and I'd always wanted to kind of bring this act back in some format. I didn't think it would be with an audience volunteer, but that's how it worked for this. But some of the other things, they were more just these images of something and being on the trapeze, and and then you do the hard work of like filling in the gaps and and then some of the original images end up getting thrown out the window. But I guess I would say a lot of times that's a starting point for me. With my comedy trapeze act, the one that most people have seen, I started as an audience member, and I go up on stage to like get a selfie of myself on stage, usually with the MC, and then I see the trapeze and I want a selfie up there. And that's kind of how it starts. And my regular clothes end up coming off through the course of the trapeze act, and then I end up in this sort of sparkly outfit and kind of come into my own. So a lot of my acts obviously are about women sort of finding themselves, it sounds like. But actually that act, like the impetus for that act is that a lot of times I would train trapeze in my glasses because I don't know, I forgot to put my contacts in or something. And there were some tricks where my glasses would always fly off and like fly across the gym, and it was always so funny. So that was kind of the first impetus, is like, I want a character that wears glasses while she does trapeze. So that's like a little thing that kind of grew into it bigger. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. On the same route, expanding a little bit, what is your litmus for knowing something's going to be good before you get it up in front of an audience? How do you know what you're doing is the right thing?
That's a really great question. Well, I would say I never create stuff just in a vacuum. I always have check-in points with people along the way. So even like my solo show, I started with this idea. I started by talking it through with my husband. He's, such a great partner, so supportive, but also like this great creative mind, and knows performance. So that's awesome. And then, when he was like, yep, that's great, you should definitely do that. I made a storyboard, and then I met with Steve Smith, and I said, I don't know if this is crazy, but can I show you my storyboard? And he saw it and he said, yes, this is great, you should do it. And then, I reached out to Jeff Raz and I said, can I show you my story? So, and then I worked with Jeff as a director. I did, even when developing that, I did some very informal little showings at some different places to see how audiences reacted, and of course showed it to some friends and coaches. And so I guess that's my litmus test, is like the people I trust as well as audiences that I don't know anything about, and trying to get it in front of people before the final show. But other than that, I often say, I think that artists are both the most egotistical people and also the most like self-effacing. We always are worried that we're terrible and not good enough and the worst and all of this. And at the same time, we have to have a strong enough ego and enough confidence to say like, this idea is good and I'm going to throw my entire self at it and put it out there for the world to see. That takes like a real ego, I guess, or just like a faith, or that we have to, like, what else are we going to do, right? We just need it. So.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that is who we are in a nutshell. What is, looking at your entire oeuvre, like everything you've ever done, in all the different roles, what piece or show or performance or whatever, what have you, are you the most proud of?
I think I would say my solo show, Cara Vita, partially because, solo shows are really hard. And I did a lot of it myself. I basically self-produced it and costumed it, as well as wrote it and built a lot of the props. And although I had a director, I would say, some people think of that as like that person then really like it was their vision, but it wasn't. It was my creation, and that was always really clear, and my director was there to help support my vision, and be an outside eye. So I think that one, I think it was a really beautiful show. I think it's a shame that the pandemic sort of cut its life short, and maybe I'll bring it back, although I'm not there yet. But I was also really proud that I was able to take something that I made and make it successful, not just in my little local community, but I toured it to Asheville, North Carolina, and it was very successful there. And then I took it to London, and that was a really hard thing. You know, taking a show on your own to London is not easy. It was hard and it was really scary, but it was very successful. And I got all these great reviews from London reviewers, and that's like a super cool thing. You know, so that feels great. Yeah.
Logistically, taking your show to London, how did you do that? What was the process? How did you book the theater and promote it and all those little finicky bits?
Yeah, well, it was part of a festival, which I would say, like, people who are looking to get their work out there, festivals are a great way. It's not, you're not going to make money doing festivals, in my experience, which is limited. You're not going to make money doing it, but it's a great way to get the work out there to different audiences. And festivals are really fun. You meet a lot of people. So I applied to Vault Festival. I was accepted. It's a really big festival. It's like one of the biggest next, like after Edinburgh, a really big festival, and it's very cool for all different kinds of theater. So I applied, I was accepted, that was awesome. And so, you know, they give you the theater space. Well, they don't give it to you. You know, you have to like cover the costs of all these things, but you don't have to like search it down or anything. It takes care of a lot. But with most festivals, and definitely with Vault, you still have to do the marketing on your own. You still have to, you know, figure out your tech crew. You have to do all of those things. And this one, they were great. They give some help with that. But these things are particularly difficult in another country. So it was tough. I did end up hiring like a marketing company that helped kind of get the word out a little bit, because it's really tough to build an audience in a different country where no one knows you know, unless you're like, you know, really big fancy person. I was lucky because I have a friend that I grew up with who's living in London and actually has been doing theater. So he wasn't able to help on my show, but he was able to like recommend a friend who was like helped as the tech person. And then my husband Drew came with us and helped with the tech. And then I did have a violinist in my show. I really call it solo-ish because the violinist Claire is actually a huge part of the show. But she came, so we had a great time, and it was hard. You know, we packed everything into these like giant bags, and it's the middle of winter in London, like rain and cold, and like lugging these giant bags with the whole show in them, you know, through train stations and upstairs and downstairs, and it was wild, but really fun.
So again, along similar lines as to what you're most proud of, and yeah, that sounds amazing. I would love to do a festival with the show that we're working on right now, and that's not something I'd thought of before. But we've only done it once, so it'll be a little while before you can get there. But along the same lines as what you're most proud of, what's something you've always wanted to do but couldn't in terms of logistics or costs or just whatever? What is the piece, show, or performance that you've always wanted to make happen that you haven't been able to do yet?
That's a really good question. You know, I would say first, a lot of the shows, I go ahead and do them anyway. I would just say I do like scaled down versions of them. But A Midsummer Night's Dream, now that we did this sort of first version of it that ended up being virtual, I am really hoping and planning to do a version of this that can be with professionals in a live space. And this is not going to be easy, nor is it going to be cheap, because it's immersive and interactive and has circus and also has like sing along, dance along, karaoke. So this is like a really going to be so fun to be at, and also a big thing. So that's one of the ones definitely on my like dream list, and I'll get there. Just gotta give it a little time.
Okay, I got a couple more questions for you. Let's say three more questions. What's some of the media that influenced the performer that you became? Like the TV shows, movies, music, other performers, other theater. What's some of the media that influenced the clown and trapeze artist and director that you became?
That is a good one too. Let's see. Growing up, before my dad taught in a high school, he was actually part of a circus, or it was not circus. It was a theater ensemble, but they did children's theater that was really physical and I mean, I only vaguely remember it because I was a little kid, but I still have images from that in my mind. There was music in it and theater and yeah, very physical and a lot of imagery. And I would say that that probably had a very strong influence on me from the start. Um, in college, I remember visiting Chicago and seeing Looking Glass Theater's Metamorphosis, and this was probably the one most influential piece on me. Seeing that show that is theater and combines storytelling. It's incredibly physical. It's the one that's got like the pool of water in the center of the stage, and it's a beautiful show. They use circus in it, but not in like a circusy way. It's just like the vocabulary again for the physicality and a lot of imagery and metaphor. So that was definitely very influential for me. Let's see what else. I remember when I was a kid, I also watched, my dad would get us like Marx Brother movies and Peter Sellers. And I also remember watching the Carol Burnett show. So I would say like now watching those things and looking back, it's like, oh yeah, that's definitely like my sense of humor. Like those kinds of comedians, like really broad, physical, super ridiculous comedy, definitely totally up my alley. So those are the ones that spring to mind.
Okay. Um, Second to last question. What projects are you currently working on, and where can people find your work?
Ah, yes. Okay. Well, I'm a little bit in between projects, to be honest. I wish I had something more exciting, but um, I encourage people to check out Circus Pop-Ups. We're done with our season, but it was super fun and beautiful, and that's our Instagram is just Circus Pop-Ups, and you can watch. We also in addition to the live shows, we made videos of each of the performers with the musicians, and the videos are really beautiful. I'm really proud of them. So that's definitely, if you want just like a little shot of like circus and music and beauty, that is a great thing to look up, Circus Pop-Ups. And then other than that, right now I'm really like gearing up for the season with Circus Center. I will be directing a couple of shows this year, but we're still kind of in the works, so I'm kind of hesitant to say exactly what. But that's sort of the next thing on the horizon for me is a lot of directing and producing. So looking forward to that.
Okay, last question. If you could tag 3 other people to be on the podcast after you, who would they be?
Oh gosh, well, Abraham, you've probably already talked to a lot of people that I would think to tag. So let me think. I have to think about who you maybe haven't. Have you talked to Ceci Walken yet?
No, I haven't.
I would talk to her. She's like an up and coming clown. I think she's lovely and really interesting. And she actually also does a lot of improv. So I think she'd be right up your alley. I would talk to her. And you're mostly clowns, right?
Anyone circus, mostly clowns, but we do everyone circus now.
Anyone circus. Okay. Well, I just recently had a conversation with Searchma Bayamba, the contortion coach, and it was such a beautiful conversation. I think she's so amazing and lovely. And, if you want to get like real old school circus, but also someone who's like pushing into the future, has all of these like great ideas for how to like really push contortion into the new world. I think she would be a fabulous person to talk to. She's so brilliant. I think I love her. Yes, I would recommend her. And then finally, if you haven't talked to Xiao Hong yet, he's moving to Taiwan, and this is like a circus treasure that we're about to lose. So I think everybody should talk to him right now. Poor guy's going to be really busy, but he is like has such a great storyteller and is such a wealth of information and knowledge. So those are my 3 recommendations.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being on the podcast, Felicity.
My pleasure. Thank you, Abraham. This was fun.
All right, everyone. I will see you next week. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today on Ridiculous Life of a Clown. If you enjoyed this program and you'd like to get more of it, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon at patreon.com/picklewater. For as little as $1 a month, you can help make sure that this podcast keeps coming to your ears on a regular basis. Theme music by Kevin MacLeod.